My name is Eleanor Hart, and I am 66 years old. For most of my life, I believed I was one of the fortunate ones. I had a modest home, a comfortable pension from my years as a school librarian, and a small circle of people I trusted. After my husband passed away a decade ago, I learned how to enjoy my own company. I spent mornings with tea on the porch and evenings reading novels I had once recommended to students. It was a quiet, honest life. But loneliness has a way of whispering to you at night. Not loudly, not urgently. It just nudges. And so, when companionship came knocking, unexpected, warm, and flattering, I didn't slam the door. I opened it carefully, cautiously, but perhaps not cautiously enough. His name was Daniel Pierce, a 59-year-old contractor whose charm was subtle but persistent. I met him at our community garden. He claimed he admired how I spoke to my tomato plants as though they were old friends. It was such a ridiculous line that I laughed, and that laugh opened a space between us. Daniel was gentle, or at least he seemed to be. He shared stories of odd jobs, failed business ventures, and childhood summers spent on a lake he couldn't remember the name of. His imperfections made him feel real. And I, being a woman who spent years teaching children the importance of honesty, assumed that authenticity was the default nature of people. My mother, God rest her soul, used to tell me, "Never mix love and money, Ellie. People can fake affection, but numbers never lie." She had lived through a marriage to a gambling man, and the lesson had been etched into her bones. I heard her warning again the evening Daniel told me his truck needed repairs, and the mechanic was bleeding him dry. I remember the way he sighed, the way he looked down at his hands, embarrassed, vulnerable. I told myself I was helping a friend, not financing a romance. I handed him the first check. And as I signed my name, a strange chill ran down my spine, light, barely noticeable. Only later would I realize it wasn't the breeze from the open window. It was the first whisper of the storm that would soon swallow my quiet life whole. But back then, all I saw was a man who smiled with grateful eyes and touched my hand with tenderness. If only I had listened. If only I had remembered that warning. The trouble had already begun. The betrayal didn't unfold with dramatic flair. It was quiet, subtle, almost polite. A week after I helped Daniel with his truck repairs, he came to my house holding a bottle of inexpensive wine and a smile that looked rehearsed. He told me he had landed a new contracting job. Finally a stroke of luck, but needed a short-term loan to purchase materials. He promised to repay me as soon as the client paid him. I hesitated for the first time. But hesitation is a fragile thing. It collapses easily under the weight of someone else's need. I gave him the money. 2 weeks later, he asked again. Different story, same tone of helplessness. Something about an accountant who messed up his invoices. Then it was unpaid taxes. Then it was a sick sister. Each story believable enough, delivered with just the right amount of distress. The problem wasn't the requests, it was the way they made me feel, unsteady, as though I were walking on water and pretending it was solid ground. Finally, the shock arrived in a beige envelope. A notice from my bank. A polite but firm letter informing me that someone I trusted, had attempted to add himself as an authorized user on one of my accounts by phone. My bank denied the request, but they advised me to review recent account activity for peace of mind. Peace of mind. An interesting choice of words. I called the bank immediately. The representative confirmed withdrawals I didn't recognize. Transfers I never made. A check I had signed, yes, but altered after the fact. Altered. That word collapsed something inside me. Daniel had access to my purse the night he brought wine. I remembered setting it on the counter while he reached for glasses. I remembered telling him where the spare checks were kept because he wanted to leave a thank you note. A thank you note. My stomach twisted. I drove to his house that evening. His truck wasn't there. The porch light was off. The windows were dark. I knocked until my knuckles hurt. No answer. Daniel wasn't missing. He was hiding. The betrayal was complete, not because he took my money, but because he took my trust and used it like a crowbar. When I returned home, I sat at my kitchen table and felt the weight of something unfamiliar. Not sadness. Not anger. Resolve. He had taken something from me, but he had no idea who he was dealing with. Growing up, I learned early that trust is a currency more valuable than money. My father squandered it through bets and broken promises, leaving my mother to rebuild our lives through sheer persistence. She never spoke badly of him, but her silence was an education. I promised myself I would never be like her, exhausted, anxious, waiting for the next disaster caused by someone she loved. But life has a cruel sense of irony. Even at 66, you can repeat old family patterns without realizing it. After my husband Richard died, I kept people at arm's length. Not out of bitterness, but self-preservation. Loneliness, however, is a skilled negotiator. It bargains quietly. It convinces you that vulnerability is harmless, that companionship is worth the risk. My motives were simple. I wanted someone to share morning coffee with. Someone to talk to beyond the walls of my home. I didn't believe I would ever love again, but I believed in warmth. That was enough. Daniel saw that. He saw the gentle spaces in my life and filled them. The more I think back, the clearer it becomes. He studied me. He asked about my past, my finances, my habits, my routines, all under the guise of caring conversation. He even asked about my mother's sayings, the little lessons she engraved in me. When I told him the one about love and money, he laughed and kissed my hand. "You're safe with me," he said. "I don't mix the two." I remember feeling reassured. Now the memory feels like a bruise. I wasn't the only one with motives. Daniel had been through divorces, 2 of them. He had financial troubles he mentioned vaguely, always with the tone of a man unfairly burdened by circumstance. He told stories polished by repetition, details shifting slightly each time, but always landing in his favor. I wanted to believe him. He wanted to be believed. My mother used to say, "Some people tell the truth like a seed. It grows. Others tell it like smoke. It disappears as soon as you look too closely." Daniel's stories were smoke. And as I sat reviewing my bank statements and the timeline of his excuses, I realized something chilling. He didn't fall into the role of a liar. He practiced for it. And I, with my quiet routines and my soft heart, was the perfect rehearsal space. But what Daniel didn't know, what my mother gave me, perhaps without realizing, is that I inherited her backbone too. Behind her softness was steel, and mine was beginning to sharpen. The next morning, fueled by the cold clarity that only betrayal can bring, I drove back to Daniel's house. Still empty, still silent. But this time I didn't knock. I walked around the side yard, where a recycling bin had tipped over in the wind. Papers were scattered across the ground, receipts, scraps, an old flyer, and a small stack of envelopes bound with a rubber band. They weren't addressed to Daniel. They were addressed to 5 different women, all older than me. All local. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I took pictures of everything, careful not to disturb the pile. I wasn't ready to confront him legally. Not yet. I needed more. I visited the hardware store where Daniel claimed he bought materials for his contracting work. The manager knew him, but not as a customer. "He comes in to use the restroom," the manager said flatly. Never bought a thing. I drove next to the address he gave me for his sick sister. A young couple lived there, confused, polite, and very much unrelated. Piece by piece, the facade was crumbling. I checked public property records. Daniel didn't own his house. He rented month to month, and was 3 months behind. I visited his former employers. The stories he told me about unfair clients were lies. He had a habit of taking deposits and vanishing. I printed everything, records, statements, timelines. My dining table transformed into an investigation board. But the most damning discovery came from something simple, his phone number. I typed it into a reverse lookup database, and within seconds, I found 3 online complaints describing a man who used the exact same stories he fed me. Truck repairs, material costs, sick relatives, promises of repayment. Each woman reported losing money. Some lost thousands. One lost her retirement savings. My heart sank. This wasn't a relationship. It was a pattern, a system, a career. Some men build houses. Some build families. Daniel built illusions. And I was done being part of his blueprint. But revenge, ethical revenge, requires patience. It requires precision. Fortunately, librarians know a thing or two about organization, documentation, and uncovering things people try to hide. And I was just getting started. The breakthrough arrived through a simple phone call. One of the numbers on the online complaint pages belonged to a woman named Margaret, age 71. When I reached her, she hesitated. Fear and embarrassment layered in her voice like dust on an untouched shelf. But once she understood I wasn't calling to judge her, she opened up. She told me Daniel had taken nearly $12,000 before disappearing. Same promises. Same stories. Same gentle smiles. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. He introduced me to his business partner. A woman. Said she helped him manage things. A woman? I had never heard of her. Margaret forwarded me a blurry photo. And there she was, a woman in her 50s, standing beside Daniel at some event. She looked comfortable, familiar with him, trusting. My heart ached for her. Because she wasn't a partner. She was a future victim, or a current one who didn't know it yet. That night, I traced Daniel's phone number again, this time using a more advanced tool. It revealed a small motel 2 towns over. I drove there the next morning, waited in my car, and watched. At 9:17 a.m., Daniel stepped out of room 14 with the same woman from the photo. He placed his hand on her back, the same gesture he used on me. She laughed. He kissed her cheek. They looked like a couple sharing an intimate morning. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. He was already weaving his next web. I recorded everything. Daniel was gone, but something else had arrived in his place, something I hadn't expected. Community. The women he hurt became my friends. We met for coffee, shared stories, laughed at things we once cried over. Healing rarely happens alone. And in stopping him, I had also stopped the parts of myself that believed loneliness justified risk. Revenge had brought justice. Justice had brought peace. In the months after Daniel's sentencing, my life settled into something new. Not quiet, but peaceful in a deeper way. I tended my garden again. I read on my porch. But now, there was laughter from women who once sat in silence with me. We weren't broken. We were survivors. And survival builds strength. I often think back to the moment I signed that first check. Not with shame, but understanding. Trust is not a flaw. Compassion is not a weakness. And loneliness is not a failing. What matters is what we do once we see the truth. My mother's warning echoes in my mind. Never mix love and money. But I realize now her message was bigger than that. It wasn't about finances. It was about boundaries. About knowing that love, real love, requires clarity, honesty, and mutual respect. Anything less is manipulation wearing kindness as a mask. I don't regret meeting Daniel. Not anymore. Without that experience, I wouldn't have helped uncover years of exploitation. I wouldn't have forged friendships with women who now feel like family. Revenge, when done ethically, isn't about hurting someone who hurt you. It's about restoring balance, reclaiming power, choosing truth over silence. As I sit here, speaking this story into the quiet of my living room, I offer you the lesson I learned the hard way. Trust openly. Love carefully. Document everything. And when someone tries to exploit your kindness, remember, calm truth is the sharpest blade. If my story resonated with you, I invite you to share your thoughts. Your voice matters more than you know. What would you have done in my place?